Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay, dear viewers, I welcome you all on the third lecture on this topic of interpretation of statutes. My name is Dr. Ajay Sonamne, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. So today we will be discussing on the topic of judicial process and interpretation of statutes. So before we begin with the lecture, we will try to understand that what we are going to cover in this particular topic. First, we will try to understand the judiciary as an institution. Second, we will discuss an overview of judicial process. Third, we will try to understand the judicial process as an instrument of social order. Then we will try to understand the reasoning during this judicial process, that when the judges are passing their judgments or delivering their judgments, then how much the role that reasoning plays an important role. Then methods of interpretation, which is mentioned or declared or laid down by the Justice Cardozo, and important principles such as presumptions and reasoning. And another concept which is very prevalent when it comes to the judicial process, that is nothing but the judicial activism. So before again, I would like to quote here the one observation that is laid down by, according to Honorable Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud. What he has mentioned, that in the process of constitutional deliberation that goes on in court, one fosters a new and emerging conscience. In that conscience which emerges through the process of judicial deliberation, one puts out hope for better future for our societies. So, dear viewers, through this statement or observation, what we can understand? We can understand that the simply judicial deliberation, when the court is deliberating upon a particular provision of the constitution, or for that matter any other law, then that not only delivers the interpretation to that particular statute, but somewhere that also help for the betterment of society for some or other manner. So therefore, this judicial interpretation or judicial deliberation through this judicial process is not merely the interpretation only, but also that helps for the betterment of society in at large. So now just to first let us try to understand the judiciary, because why this understanding is important, because when we talk about interpretation of statutes, then the primary role of judiciary is to interpret the law. So therefore, we need to understand that how this judicial process works, what are the basic or fundamental principles that are associated with that, and accordingly we will try to understand that how this judiciary is definitely working over this interpretation of statutes. So first, the principle, that is doctrine of separation of power. So doctrine of separation of power, as you must be aware that Montesquieu, who has developed this theory of doctrine of separation of power, wherein he has mentioned that there are three important organs, that is legislature, executive and judiciary, and wherein these three organs are divided there, or the job has been assigned within these three organs, that legislature will make the law, then executive will execute the law, and judiciary will interpret the law. So here the primary role of the judiciary again is to interpret the law, and therefore judiciary as an institution, or you can say judiciary again, the one of the important organ of the state, is very pioneer to interpret the law. So the role of judiciary is very important to interpret the law of the land, that is constitution, and any other law for that matter. And also it is called as the judiciary is the guardian of the constitution, because under the constitution, if we talk about two important provision like article 32 or article 226, which basically assist to protect the basic rights or fundamental rights of an individual, and like article 226 also one step ahead, that protects the legal rights of the individual as well. So therefore, this is like judiciary as an institution, it also considered as the soul of democracy, because even if you refer the statement that is made by the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, wherein he has mentioned that the soul of the constitution is the Article 32 of the constitution, and Article 32 assumes the importance because it basically protects the basic fundamental rights of the individuals. Further, another feature that is associated with the judiciary is the independence of judiciary. So when we talk about independence of judiciary, then the judiciary should have that independence while interpreting the law, and plus while having that independence they can explore, they can interpret, they can creatively interpret the law, and therefore this is necessary. So if there is an interference by any other organ, maybe like executive or legislative organ, so that will basically not survive the purpose. So therefore judiciary must have that independence while interpreting the law. Also they should have that independence to explore and also to creatively interpret the law, so that they can protect the rights of individual in a better manner. Then moving ahead, we have a strong judiciary with hierarchical system, because from the lower court to the apex court we have number of stages of, you can say, the court system, wherein the every judge and their role has been specifically defined, and even under the General Clauses Act, the definition that also has been given, like what do you understand by district judge, or what do you mean by the high court judge. So that word has already been defined also in the General Clauses Act. So this hierarchical system that we have, that also placed an importance to have this judicial process in a better manner, because looking at the doctrine like doctrine of precedent, wherein there is a binding nature of the judgment that is passed by the higher judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court of India under Article 141. So therefore this hierarchical system and also the doctrine of precedent that maintains the uniformity even in the judgment on the similar facts of the case, and also that maintains the uniformity that is on the law declared by the higher judiciary. Then moving ahead, judiciary definitely works, or you can say works towards the protector as well as the caretaker of the fundamental right or the basic rights of the individual, because judiciary, through their, you can say, innovative interpretation or interpretation for the betterment of the individuals, they have tried to achieve, or they have tried to achieve such ideals which is mentioned in the preamble of the constitution, and also tried to achieve the human rights ideologies which is very necessary for the protection of the rights of the individual. Then moving ahead, judiciary definitely assists to maintain the true spirit of law, because merely interpretation of the word or interpretation of the text in the act is not enough. What is also important in that, in addition to that, is the maintaining the true spirit of law, and that is possible by understanding the statute as a whole, and even during the judicial process or when they are adhering to the certain principles of interpretation, then that spirit of law can be take out or can be bring out from the interpretation by the judiciary. In addition to that, the application of law with principle of natural justice, that is again very important, because if you see this natural justice principle, wherein in the natural justice principle, wherein the judiciary basically gives an opportunity to both the parties to put their argument, to put their issues and put their you can say facts and circumstances, and therefore by giving the opportunity to both the parties, judiciary delivers their judgment. So this principle of natural justice is very important, wherein this may not be expressly mentioned in the legislation, but despite of that, it is one of the principle that has been followed by the judiciary, and it is very important part and parcel of the judicial process. And when the judiciary, maybe higher judiciary or maybe the lower judiciary, both has to follow this principle of natural justice. And ultimately, when we talk about any particular judge, when he is acting as a judge of any court, maybe lower court or high court, the courage or the foresight, like for considering the future consequences, future impact, or the future necessity of a particular judgment or particular facts and circumstances, and its imagination power, even that needs to be that plays a very important role as a judge, because judge merely cannot just apply the law which is mentioned in front of him and also apply that law to the facts and that's it. But Apart from that, if there are certain situations that comes wherein the judge may have to go one step ahead within constitutional limit itself, but judge has to take some courageous action when it required to be taken. So moving ahead, now what are the important aspects that we need to understand when we talk about the judicial process? So first important aspect that we need to understand the difference between the common law system and civil law system. So as you can see in the common law system, because this common law system is primarily based upon the decisions that is delivered by the higher judiciary of that respective country. So it is also called as a judge-made law, because earlier the law which was not primarily it was only implemented by the authorities, but the ultimately judge who declares the law that had given the importance more than the law. So in the common law system, it's a judge-made law, assumes more importance, and it has a higher value, especially when the judges going to interpret that law, they are going to understand that law, they are going to apply that law to the facts of the case, they are going to interpret that law in a such a manner that will give the justice to the individual. So therefore, the common law system is based upon the judge-made law, and plus that also benefits in another perspective that when these similar facts that comes before the court, the same law that is declared by the court in earlier cases, that can be applicable again. So here the doctrine of precedent or doctrine of stare decisis can be play an important role in the common law system, because once you apply the same decision to the similar facts, then it may not create the confusion for the future cases on the similar facts that may happen in future. And this common law system generally applicable like country like USA, India and Australia. So these countries that follow or inculcate this principle of common law system. And other than that, there is another civil law system. Now there is a difference. So civil law system is primarily based upon the law which is enacted by the authorities like parliament or state legislature, and this rules basically on in the form of codified statutes. So in the civil law system, they believe more on the codified statutes rather than the judge-made laws. So like in the common law system, wherein the article 141 assumes the importance, so in the civil law system it is the codified statutes that assumes more importance, and therefore the primary fundamental or the fundamental basis of civil law system is nothing but the substantive and procedural law. So substantive laws are nothing but which define rights and liabilities of an individual, and procedural law which lays down that how the legal proceedings that shall happen. So procedural law and substantive law are the foundations of the civil law system, and there are certain countries like Italy, Japan, France, they deal with this civil law system or they adopt this civil law system. Now in addition to that, there is one more important aspect of the judicial process, and that is adversarial and inquisitorial system. So this adversarial system is very important. Again, these two systems are very important part and parcel of judicial process, because under the adversarial system, the judiciary is basically act as a referee, you can say, or act as a person who hear from both the parties. So as a judge, he hear the arguments from both the parties, understand the facts, understand the evidence that is submitted by both the parties, and then as a referee, he delivers the judgment. So here what happens, that judge is not participating as a third person into the arguments or into the evidence or any collection of any evidence. Judge simply delivers the judgment based on the argument from both the side and evidence that is supported by both the parties. So it is a judge is the third person, or it is like the referee in the particular case, or you can say he is a neutral adjudicator who hears both the parties and decide the case. And opposite to that, there is the inquisitorial system. Now in the inquisitorial system, in this process, judge now participate in the legal proceedings. So participation means what? Judge basically tries to give the instructions. It may be related to the investigation of the case, related to the parties, how they can submit the evidence, how much witness has to be produced before the court. So in the inquisitorial system, the judge basically participate in the legal proceedings, in the legal investigation, and judge gives the instruction also in the inquisitorial system. So India basically adhere to the adversarial system. So in India we follow the adversarial system, wherein the judge here basically acts as a referee. He does not basically interfere into the investigation that is done by the police or any other authorities. So role of the judge in the adversarial system is only to listen the arguments, accept the evidences which are relevant, and give the decision. So here, if you see, in the adversarial system and the in the inquisitorial system, the role of judge is different, and according to even the role of prosecutor and the role of judge in both the cases, that is different. Because if you take an example of like criminal proceedings, so in the criminal proceedings in the adversarial system, the primary observation that is, or primary assumption that is made by the judge is that accused will be considered as the innocent until proven guilty. And in the inquisitorial system, wherein the judge will consider after understanding all the facts, circumstances, evidences, everything. So here the role that basically changes in the adversarial and the inquisitorial system, and it is the India India follows the adversarial system. Okay, but yes, there are some instances that judge may take certain principle from the inquisitorial system. Moving ahead, now this is again another important process that helps the judges while interpreting the statutes, or for that matter while coming to the conclusion over a particular case or over a particular judgment. So here, if you see that there are certain points which is mentioned here, that is reasoning in judicial process. That first point is the application of facts with admissible and relevant evidence. So definitely it is the primary role of judge that whenever any case that is presented before the judge, then judge has to take out the relevant fact from that particular case and apply the evidence to that relevant fact only. Otherwise there is no you can say importance or ratio cannot be taken out if the evidence are not attached to the relevant facts of the case. Similarly, reasons, now here we are talking about reasons. So whenever a judge specifically come to the conclusion of any particular case, then first question comes into the mind of ordinary person, that what is the reason, like how judge has come to that particular case. Like if any, like even in the administrative authorities, if for any daily routine, you might have observed that if any person gives a particular judgment or any particular conclusion or any decision, come to any particular decision, then what is the reason behind that. So similarly, even in this judicial process, it is the important, you can say, job or the role of the judge to give the reasons, because unless and until reasons are not given, the judge may not, or even the parties may not understand that how that judge has come to the conclusion. And this reasoning is not only important for the parties of that particular case, but also it is important for the higher courts, because for example, if that particular decision is given by High Court with certain reasons, then if matter goes to the higher court by way of an appeal, even reasoning plays an important role, because higher court will understand that particular case, that how the lower court has come to the conclusion, which is based on the reasoning. Then further, reasoning also conveys the ideas, thoughts, judicial explanation and persuasion. So when a judge basically giving a reason to this particular case, so reason may not be necessarily that will come out of the statutes, it will also connected with some evidences, it may connected with certain expressions or his own philosophy, own belief, or some jurisprudential analysis, and based upon that he can come to the conclusion. So merely the statutes and their provision will not assist to come to the conclusion, but in addition to that there will be ideas, thoughts, judicial explanation and persuasion also comes out of the reasoning that is given by the judge. Then there is a important difference between giving reason and the reasoning. Now what is the difference between giving reasons and the reasoning? So giving reasons is definitely that when a judge has passed a particular judgment or declared any particular decision, then for that the reasons can be given, that how he has given the judgment or on what basis he has given the judgment. But reasoning is basically a prior process, that when he has received some relevant facts of the case, plus he has received some evidences which is associated with that case, then reasoning is required, that why to take up that particular evidences, why to take up that particular facts. And therefore it is the ability of judge to know his that to integrate, or you can say maintain that integrity to reach to the decision with certain reasoning. So here there is very interesting process that has been highlighted by one of the judge, that process for to arrive at the conclusion or decision making. So there is first one is this syllogistic process, then there is a inferential process, and there is a intuitive process. So let us try to understand what do you mean by this, because these are certain processes which are basically psychologically helps to judge, or even as a human being psychologically somewhere that judge when he is deciding the case, then along with the law certain processes that he also follows psychologically. So first one is the syllogistical process. So this syllogism means deductive scheme of a formal argument consisting of a major and a minor premise and a conclusion. Judge accept an argument on a major premise which overweighs the minor premise to draw his own conclusion, right? So in this syllogism or the syllogistic process, wherein the judge try to take out the major premise out of the number of premises that are in front of him, and through that major premises he tried to come to a particular conclusion. So if there are premises like if it is A is equal to B or B is equal to C, then one can say that A is equal to C again. So such kind of understanding is basically helps while coming to the conclusion of particular case. Then there is an inferential process wherein the judge simply relies upon the evidence and reaches to the conclusion. So just taking out the relevant facts, evidences, and simply reaching to the conclusion without applying any other mind. And there is a intuitive process. Now in the intuitive process, it is a psychological process, and it may not be a subjective preference or biases. So obviously when the judge will decide the case, it should be considered that he shall not bias towards one party, or he shall not act arbitrarily or take any decision in an arbitrary manner or misuse his discretion. So but at the same time there are certain situations that may come wherein the judge may conclude the case, or judge may come to the conclusion along with the law certain emotional, or you can say certain vulnerable situation of that particular party, taking into consideration that situation into their mind and give the reason on that as well. So why he has considered that emotional, you may say, or that intuition of that particular situation, what he has come to that conclusion. So here it may be related to the witnessing by his own, or you can say experiences, belief, and then draw a conclusion by justifying it from the reasoning that is supplied by him. Because see, as a judge, he definitely is one of the important you can say person, but at the same time as a human being he also has certain beliefs, he also has certain intuition, he also has certain thoughts, expressions, certain ideologies. So these ideologies, these expressions somewhere also helps during this judicial process, and this also during the interpretation of statutes. And in all this method, his primary aim is obviously to reach to the truth of that particular case, to reach to the justice to these particular parties. And if judge succeeds in finding the truth along with this his own ideology, philosophy, or maybe applying sometimes his own beliefs along with the law, then that definitely one can say that that method is particularly justified one. So these three processes, this syllogistic, inferential, and intuitive process, that basically helps even psychologically, or you can say as a human being, when we are discussing this judicial process. Now here the judicial process also has played an important role as an instrument to change the social order, because if you can just observe, like whenever if you must have read in the newspaper also, or in the news channel, whenever any judgment that is passed by the judiciary, then that creates sometimes a more impact not only to the parties but also to the entire society, right? So judicial process during this coming to the conclusion of any particular case, or while interpreting the statutes or interpreting the constitution, they come to such process of interpretation that basically assist to the future judgment that are coming in future. So it is not only to that particular case, but that also, in addition to that, that also helps to the other cases that may come in future. So therefore these are certain instances. This is not like you can say a full, there may be many other incidences that can come under the judicial process as as a instrument of social order. So first one we'll see here, application and interpretation of laws. Then second one we have redressal. Then the judiciary as a guarantor of rights and interest. Then deterrence and the prevention, doctrine of stare decisis, then ensuring the duties as a citizen and accountability, then uplifting rights of vulnerable section of the society, then ensuring the rule of law, then balance of conflict of interest and adherence with the sociological transformation. So these are like some of the outcome, or you can say job, that is done by the judiciary just to make sure that the society shall order in peaceful manner, or society shall function in a peaceful manner. So while applying the law or while interpreting the laws, so while applying the law, judge definitely takes into consideration the rules, regulations, and also the condition which is prevalent in the society, because it is not, as you can see, the transformation that takes place in the society or even in this in the sociological perspective, even that has to be taken into consideration by the judge. And obviously judge is there to as a arbitrator, or you can say dispute redressal entity, wherein they resolve the dispute between the parties, and also it guarantees the rights and interest of the individual, because the judge here, if I say that, it is not only interpreting the law or interpreting the constitution or the fundamental right, but very important point that we have to remember here is that judge also recognize certain rights. So if there are certain rights, like for example in like right to education, or for that matter rights of the children, so how that right have been recognized from certain judgments or certain situation, and then further that has been strengthened with the help of the fundamental rights of the Constitution of India. So therefore guaranteeing the rights and the interest of an individual is definitely a constitution as a document ensures that. But along with that, judiciary who basically make it very pragmatic and make it very practical in a sense wherein the people can enjoy that particular right and people can exercise that particular rights and interest. Then deterrence and prevention. So as a judge, when he delivers a particular judgment, like in the criminal proceedings, so if someone has committed some serious crimes, heinous crimes, when judge declares a punishment which is very harsh, then that also creates a message, or that also creates a deterrent situation for the society, and also that so that also achieve to prevent someone to do that again in the future, right? So therefore deterrence and prevention also helps to maintain the social order, like the judgment that is passed by the court, and through which deterrence and the prevention that impact that created in the society, so that also helps to maintain the social order. Then doctrine of stare decisis. So again it is nothing but the doctrine of precedent, which is enshrined under article 141 of the Constitution. So wherein definitely once the higher judiciary declare a particular law, then that maintain the uniformity for all the lower court as well as to the administrative authority, and accordingly that social order will be maintained again. Then ensuring the duties as a citizen and accountability. So as a judge, he not only focuses upon the rights but also give sometimes you can say a remembrance to all the public that even duties are equally important. Then uplifting the rights of vulnerable section of the society, because the judiciary also has made easy access to justice for the people who are vulnerable or who are poor in the society. So therefore to ensure that vulnerable groups or the people who are disadvantaged position, they shall not suffer they shall not suffer because of their economic condition, and they may not able to approach to the court. So for that matter, even the court has introduced certain schemes so that they can have a better access to justice. And again the rule of law, that is Constitution, has to be followed and has to be respected by each and everyone. Then balancing the conflict of interest, again that is very important, because as the human being, everyone has its own interest on a particular aspect, but how to balance that, how to maintain that balance. So here again the judge plays an important role to balance that conflict, maybe through whenever that might have arisen through dispute or through any other matter, and adheres with the sociological transformation. So as society transforms, as society changes, even judge has to act accordingly. So here there is another important aspect that we have to see, and that is mentioned by Justice Benjamin Cardozo. He is a very renowned judge from USA, and he has basically laid down a very important aspects for a judge, that how one judge should be, or it may be psychological aspect or mental aspect, or how to interpret the law, how to apply the law. He has given a very guidelines, a very good guidelines in his lecture, also in his book that is titled as The Nature of Judicial Process. So here he has basically given the 4 methods of interpretation. So as a judge, when he is following the judicial process, then he has given the 4 methods. That is, number 1, that is method of logic or philosophy. Number 2, method of history, evolution. Number 3, method of custom, tradition. And number 4, method of sociology. So let us try to understand what are these 4 methods that is highlighted by the Justice Benjamin Cardozo. So as per Justice Cardozo, first method, that is method of logic, he says that the method of philosophy is also commonly known as method of logic. Through this method, the judges are expected to follow a line of logical progression, and the interpretation of the statute should preserve legal and logical consistency, right? So in this method of logic and philosophy, because ultimately at the outset we generally say that law is nothing but the logic. So when the judge is going to apply that particular law to a particular relevant facts and circumstances of the case, then what to follow is the line of logical progression, and accordingly he should preserve the legal and logical consistency. So balance has to be maintained between the what has been written in the law and also the logic that generally applied by the human being. Then coming to the second one, that is method of history or evolution, wherein as per Justice Cardozo, the method of history or evolution relates to the interpretation of statute based on the historical origin of that rule. The emphasis in this method of interpretation lies on how a rule or a statute came into being and what was the corresponding intention behind the evolution. So basically the history behind that law is equally important before interpreting any particular law. So therefore, according to this Justice Cardozo, again one has to understand what was the background of that act, how that act has came into existence, what was the need of the society at that time, was there any issues, was there any challenges, was there any problem that was arised, and accordingly the parliament has prepared the law. So whether the law is fulfilling that criteria, or that basically that issues which was occurred earlier. So basically this history or evolution of that particular law is equally important. That's why we call it as a, whenever we go into the background of that law, or we try to understand from all perspective, then we'll get a good idea about that particular law. Then third we have is the method of custom or tradition. So as per Justice Cardozo, customs and traditions subconsciously have an impact on the thinking of the judges, right, and inadvertently have an impact on the decision making. So therefore it is safe to say that same should be used as a backdrop in decision making, as they rightly denote the community values. Because in every society like India is very diversified society, maybe for the religion, tradition, culture. So as a judge, he may not restrict his vision to the interpretation of the text which is in front of him, but also if it is required, if the matter is associated or connected with the tradition, culture, religion, considering the diversity that we have, then even judge has to apply such method of the custom and tradition, and wherein they can understand that what is the custom tradition which can create a different views for the different religion or different tradition or different culture, and accordingly they have to accept it. And the last one is the method of sociology, wherein while interpreting statutes, importance should be given to the social welfare and the justice. Now here the best example that we can give here is the social welfare and justice, wherein the welfare of all, and even the Constitution of India, like part 4 of the Constitution, which is titled as Directive Principle of State Policy, wherein the provisions have been made in such a manner that basically promote the social welfare of the society, or social welfare of all the people. And similarly, even when the court interpret the fundamental rights, then they try to achieve the similar goals, wherein when they are protecting the fundamental rights of the individual, then also they take into consideration the welfare of all. Because if there are people who are vulnerable, disadvantageous, or economically poor, then judiciary can give, or judiciary generally gives the more, you can say, benefits or importance to their you can say rights and interests, so that they can get better access, they can get the better facility, so that they shall not get deprived of their basic rights, which is just guaranteed by the Constitution of India. So therefore, these four methods that is laid down by Justice Cardozo are very important. That is number one, that is method of logic, method of history, method of custom, and method of sociology. So it is again very important part and parcel of the judicial process. Now there is one more principle again that helps under the interpretation of statutes and especially in the judicial process, that is presumption. Now when we talk about presumption, there are these four aspects that we have to remember. That is, one is the presumption of validity, then territorial operation of presumption, presumption against taking away the jurisdiction, and prospective operation of presumption. Now presumption is, in simple words, I think something that we already considered, or we keep in our, no, we have some prejudicial thinking or prejudicial mind over a particular thing, and even that has a legal, you can say that is on the legal basis. It is because there is a difference between assumption and presumption. In the presumption is something which is substantiated with the, or supported with some legal evidence or legal basis, but in assumption it is just maybe something assuming just based on your own belief or your ideas. So presumption, here judge presumes certain thing while interpreting the law or while interpreting any particular legislation. So what are those presumption? Let us try to understand. So firstly, there is a presumption of validity, which assumes that the statutes are enacted within constitutional limits and are presumed to be valid unless proven otherwise, right? So if any judge is, when is interpreting any particular law, he cannot question that whether this law is enacted correctly or not. If it is in front of him and nobody has objected that, then it is presumed that this law is valid. Okay, that is first one. The second one, we have territorial operation presumption, which limits the application of an act to territories of the country where it is enacted unless specifically provided otherwise. So territory, so it is like when any act is enacted by the parliament or state legislature, its application will be decided by that act itself, like to what jurisdiction, till what territorial jurisdiction this act will be applicable. So it is the job of judge only to consider that jurisdiction to that extent only, and nothing beyond that, or he cannot ask anything beyond that, right? So it is presumed that this is the operation of this law will be only up to the territory that is designed or that is specified by the law. Then third one, we have presumption against taking away the jurisdiction of the courts, emphasizes that interpretation should not readily strips courts of their authority unless the statute clearly explicitly intends to do so. So there are certain situations that comes wherein the any particular law that takes out the jurisdiction from the respective courts, and there is a reason for that. So it may be for the consideration, like if there are like tribunals or some if they have been established, then the court may not waste their time when the tribunals are there. So jurisdiction is basically you can say transferred to the tribunals, so that tribunals can work and can focus on that particular issue, and judiciary can do their assistance or work in some other manner. So presumption in against taking away the jurisdiction of the courts is basically is mentioned in the statute itself. It is the law clearly mentions that, and even the justification is there that can be construed by reading the whole statute. And the last one is the prospective operation presumption, which indicates that statutes are generally meant to have an effect on future events rather than retroactively impacting past circumstances unless legislature expressly dictates otherwise. So prospective operation presumption, so if any law is enacted by the parliament, then they are meant to have an effect on future acts or the events. So future acts or events are something which may happen, which yet to happen, and accordingly that law will come into force. So, and retrospectively that law cannot be applicable. So let us take some example that how judiciary has created an impact through their judicial decisions in the society. So we have, and with their good interpretation. So we have few important judgments that we have picked up because these judgments have basically not only delivered the judgment of that particular case, but that also became a landmark example throughout the generation that is to come. So in the case of Keshavanand Bharati versus State of Kerala, 1973 Supreme Court case, wherein the 13 judges bench has delivered this particular judgment, And in this particular case, the primary issue was whether the parliament can amend any part of the constitution and what was the limit to that particular power. Because as a parliament, definitely they are lawmaking authority, but when it comes to the amendment to the constitution, then it is something which is very not easy job, but again it is very minutely or very carefully has to be done. So therefore, for that matter, this particular case assumes very importance, because amending the constitution or making certain changes in the constitution, also especially in the fundamental rights, that should be discussed in a very good or detailed manner. So therefore, in this particular case, earlier there was Golaknath versus State of Punjab, wherein the similar kind of issue was raised, and wherein the court had given the judgment which was overruled in this particular case, that is Keshwanand Bharati versus State of Kerala. So in this case, the judgment that is delivered by the court was that the parliament could amend any part of the constitution, however, it cannot alter or amend the basic structure of essential feature of the constitution. So as regards to the basic structure of the constitution, court held that it would be decided from case to case basis. So this case basically recognized this doctrine and also has given the importance to the doctrine of basic structure, which is inclusive of several important doctrines such as rule of law, separation of power, judicial review, so etc. So such kind of doctrines basically are the part and parcel of basic structure, and if parliament has to amend the constitution, they have the right to amend the constitution, but without violating the basic structure doctrine. So doctrine of basic structure is something which is a limitation, you can say, or which is a restriction, or which is the guideline, or you can say boundary, that the parliament cannot amend the law beyond that. Okay, so this is one important judgment. There is another important judgment, that is MC Mehta versus Union of India 1987 Supreme Court case. Now in this case, Justice Bhagwati, who was the judge who has declared this particular judgment, and there was an issue that had came before the judge, that is in one of the chemical factory there was this leakage of oleum gas, and because of the leakage of oleum gas there was several death of the individuals, and which also created a lot of impact, or you can say physical or mental impact over the generations of the family. So therefore, in this regard, when the court was dealing this particular case, then there was a rule which was applicable in this case against this particular chemical company, that is the rule of strict liability, and this rule was basically originated from the case of Rayland versus Fletcher. So here this Rayland versus Fletcher, wherein the strict liability rule was evolved, but Justice Bhagwati in this case did not apply this particular rule in this case, and there is a justification for that. According to him, this rule of strict liability is associated with the exception, and if the exceptions are there, then the companies like who are working for such hazardous chemical factories, or who are taking the or manufacturing such hazardous chemicals, then they should have some deterrence effect, they should have some deterrent effect, they should have some responsibility, accountability, so that if anything goes wrong, then they should take that responsibility. So therefore, in this case, the Justice Bhagwati, if you see here, has introduced a new principle which is titled as absolute liability. Now this principle of absolute liability, as you can see from the title itself, it is the absolute liability, wherein the such hazardous industry will be absolutely liable. There is no scope for exception, there is no scope for any kind of no excuse for the chemical factory that this particular incident happened because of some or other reasons, and there is some third party involved into it. Court here, Justice Bhagwati here has mentioned very clearly that it is an absolute liability that one has to take if they are intent to establish such industries, and if anything goes wrong, then it is their complete responsibility. So therefore, court held that in this case, that industries engage in hazardous or inherently dangerous activities, then they are absolutely liable, and therefore that liability that they have to take up. And further, which is again very important, that the amount of compensation must be correlated to the magnitude and capacity of industry, so that it will be a deterrent, right? So the more powerful is the factory, the more financially that factory is sound or capable, in that proportion compensation will be given to the victims of that particular incidences, so that will give the deterrent effect to the factory as well. So here there is one important observation that we can see here. in this case Justice Bhagwati has given a good observation, and that is also necessary, that as a judge, that how a judge should interpret the particular situation. So what he has mentioned is that law has to grow in order to satisfy the needs of fast changing society and keep abreast with economic developments taking place in the country. As new situation arises, then law has to be evolved in order to meet the challenge of such new situations. Law cannot afford to remain static. We have to evolve. So maybe two perspectives, that we have to evolve new principles, lay down new norms which would adequately deal with the new problems which arise in highly industrial economy, right? So merely relying on the principle like strict liability, which is evolved or which has been introduced from some foreign judgment. So as the India, we are not bound 100% or mandatorily to adhere that judgment. It is just a guiding principle. So time has come now to evolve new principles, lay down new norms which would adequately deal with the new problems which arise because of the highly industrial economy. We cannot allow our judicial thinking, right, to be constricted by reference to the law as it prevails in England, or for the matter of that, in any other foreign country. We no longer need the crutches of foreign legal order, and we are certainly prepared to receive light from whatever source it comes, but we have to build our own jurisprudence. Okay, so this is again nothing but the good example that as a judge, or maybe as a legislature, or maybe at the executive body, whoever are working for the betterment of society or betterment of people, the law, we cannot just stick to the law which is in existence, or we cannot just stick to the law which is already has been followed. But if the situation demands, if the society demands, or if the situation arises due to the growing this industrial economy, for example, in this matter, then one has to take a step and one has to move forward to understand this particular seriousness, that it is not by applying simply the old rule which is introduced by foreign country, that is rule of strict liability, the situation will be resolved. No. So the court here, to have some more deterrent effect, introduces principle of absolute liability, and that law declared was again followed to the number of further cases, and even the impact of this particular judgment was such that even in the Bhopal gas tragedy case, this judgment gave this principle basically assist to get the justice to the victims even in the Bhopal gas tragedy case, because these two incidences, that this particular case and the Bhopal gas tragedy case, these two incidences basically occurred in a very close time or very nearer time. So therefore this judgment also made an impact to the upcoming cases. So this is nothing but in the social order, how the judicial process that basically helps, right? So now we will come to the another important aspect, and that is nothing but the judicial activism. And this is again very vibrant judicial process which is recently, you can say, or which is from last few decades, that has taken a good shape, and also that has helped for the weaker section of the society to get a justice. So here the term judicial activism is, as prima facie we can see that a judiciary actively participating or actively taking some steps for the betterment of justice, right? So here judicial activism, if you see here, it helps to keep check and balances for the government's branches. So if there are legislature, executive, other two branches if you talk, then this judicial activism helps to maintain that check and balance. They can maintain some observation, they can maintain that how the judiciary or how the other organs basically functioning, and are there any limitation, are there any restriction that has to be put up if it is required. So they actively can participate into it. Further, it brings solution through creative interpretation within the constitutional limits. So the judiciary, definitely the constitution is there in front of them to interpret, to deliberate, to take out the good interpretation out of it. But the situation sometimes demands more than that, and that is what is the judicial activism. So judges actively participate, like there are few judges who has actively contributed to this doctrine of judicial activism, or through their role, they basically shown the good example of judicial activism, like judges like the Justice Krishna Iyer or Justice Bhagwati, who had basically shown a good example that how judge can actively participate within constitutional limit and also protect the rights of the individual. So, and further, very important, in the absence of law, use their own judgment in situations for the solution. So, if law is not there, but situation come before the court that there is some wrong that has happened, and if there is law is not available in that situation, then how to go ahead with that? How to, how to bring the solution in this regard? So again, judge actively participate into that, and judge try to bring some justice to that situation with the help of some with the help of some interpretation. We'll take example also in that regard. Then next is it encourages judges to do what they think is appropriate within the reasonable bounds. Further, it builds the faith in judges, because as a citizen or as a common man, when a judge delivers the judgment which are not only interpreting the law, or which has not come out of the interpreting the law, but also the judgments which has been the, so you can say, fulfilling the desire or needs of the people by their innovative interpretation or by their active interpretation, then that also builds the faith on the respective judges. Further, it protects the interest of individual from the abuse of power by the different officials, because there are also situations wherein the judges have taken a step on their own to protect the rights of individual by taking action on their own. And also it strengthens the access to justice. Then through this judicial activism, one important judicial process that is evolved, and that is nothing but the public interest litigation, wherein it is basically helps for the protection and enforcement of individual and the group rights, because sometimes there are situation arises wherein the individual, being a poor or being the economical weaker, may not able to reach to the court. But in this situation, if we interpret the law which says that the person who is who has suffered the injury, only that person can reach to the court, not some person who has not suffered the injury. But here, with the help of this public interest litigation, the court introduced, or you can say court eased this rule of locus standi, wherein even if the person who has not suffered the injury, but he can approach to the court on behalf of the other person or other groups of person, so that they can get the justice who are victim of any particular case. So therefore, this public interest litigation, wherein it has eased the rule of locus standi, plus the suo motu action can be taken by the apex court. Here the Supreme Court or High Court can, on their own, they can take up the matter. Also they can consider later, or if someone has said some message on the paper also, they can consider it as a writ, or they can convert that particular letter into a writ, and they can accept that particular issue and file the case as a suo motu action on their own. And it ensures the justice for the poorer and most disadvantaged member of the society. So here the example which I was saying, that if in the absence of law, how this PIL or how this judicial activism that basically plays an important role. So there was this landmark case, Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan, which was reported in the year 1997, and wherein the Justice Sujata Manohar, who has very creatively interpreted the law and gave the justice to the victim in this particular case. So here, in the absence of enacted law, right? So what is the job of judge? To interpret the law. But if law is not there, then what to do? So in the absence of enacted law, to provide for the effective and enforcement of the basic human right of and gender equality, and guarantee against sexual harassment and abuse, more particularly against the sexual harassment at the workplace. Okay, guidelines and norms are hereby laid down for the strict observance. So here the Supreme Court exercised their power that is mentioned under Article 141, and to get the complete justice like mentioned under Article 142, or under the power that is available under Article 32 of the Constitution, then this is done in the exercise of power available under 32 of the Constitution for enforcement of the fundamental rights. It is further emphasized that this would be treated as a law declared by the Supreme Court under Article 140 of the Constitution. So in the absence of fundamental right, in the absence of enacted law, the Justice Sujata Manohar interpreted use their power under Article 32 and prepare certain guidelines with the help of the certain documents from the United Nations organization, especially the CEDAW Convention, and with the help of that, the Justice Sujata Manohar prepared the guideline, and with the help of that guideline, she declared certain guidelines which became the mandatory for all the institution or for all the private or public institutions, so that that guideline has to be followed, especially in the situation wherein there is a sexual harassment at the workplace. And this guideline were treated as a law under Article 141. But now there is a separate enactment that has been that has been introduced, or that has been brought by the parliament, but almost after 16 to 17 years that enactment came into existence. So between that 16 to 17 years, only the law which is declared by the Supreme Court that was played an important role. So there is one more example just to understand the in the VC Shukla versus Delhi administration, wherein the court could strike down the administrative act if it is biased or malified, if it is proved. And also in this case, this theory of basic structure would apply only in the constitutional amendment and not for the other law that is passed by the parliament, because that also assumes the great importance. So, and now recently there is a two issue that has been arise, that judicial activism basically has turned into a judicial overreach. So basically judiciary sometimes, or very in rare situation, has crossed sometimes their boundaries which is defined by the constitution or which is expected to be followed by the doctrine of separation of power. So here Justice Verma has clearly mentioned that it is inappropriate obviously to cross the boundaries, but at the same time judicial activism is appropriate when it is the domain of legitimate judicial review. It should neither be judicial advocism or judicial tyranny. And similarly, Justice Markandeya Kadju in this minor Priyadarshini's case 2005, we also laid down certain important aspects such as the judiciary must exercise the self-restraint and temptation to act as a super legislature. Also, it recognizes such important principle like it accomplished the two important ways, that is, first, the equality of two branches has to be maintained, like equality like legislature and executive, and second, to protect the independence of judiciary. So therefore, dear viewers, in this particular lecture, as we have been discussing, or we have been discussed about the judicial process and interpretation of statutes. So what we have covered is how the judiciary as an institution, what is the overview of judicial process, how the judicial process helps for the social order, then the principle like reasoning, principle like presumption, how they basically assist for the judicial process, and methods that is adopted by the Justice Cardozo for the interpretation of statutes, and also the impact of judiciary through the judicial activism and also some landmark judgment. So with this we conclude this particular lecture, and I hope this will be helpful for you to understand these two important concepts together. So thank you.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I'm not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I'm also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.